The rain hadn't stopped in hours when Lena stepped out of the cab and stared at the quaint little cafe she hadn't visited since childhood. Café Aurora looked exactly as she remembered. Slightly crooked signage, warm yellow lights, through fogged windows, and that same ivy crawling up the side like it had a soul of its own. She stood under the awning for a moment longer than she meant to, a part of her surprised by how little had changed. The air smelled like cinnamon and ground espresso, and for a brief second, a flicker of something warm moved behind her eyes. She adjusted her black coat, tightened her ponytail, exhaled quietly, and stepped through the door as the bell above rang like a distant echo from a forgotten part of her life. Inside, the cafe was alive with small sounds. The low murmur of vinyl jazz, the soft whir of a grinder, the clink of ceramic on wood, and behind the counter stood a man she didn't expect. Lena had imagined an older caretaker, maybe someone gray-haired and distant, but this man was 30 at most, broad-shouldered with warm eyes, a patchy apron, and dark curls tied loosely at the back. He moved like someone who belonged to the space, wiping the counter with practiced rhythm while steam curled around him like a halo. Their eyes met, and he offered a reserved smile before walking over to her with calm steps. "You must be Lena," he said, voice low but clear. "I'm Theo. I've been here a while." She returned the smile politely, brushing a raindrop from her coat. "Hi. Yeah, I figured I'd come straight here before checking in anywhere. Just wanted to get things moving." He gestured to a corner booth, and she followed him without protest, though her eyes scanned the cafe like she was indexing each detail. Old wood, soft lights, faint floral scent in the cushions. Theo sat across from her, resting his hands on the table as if grounding himself. "Your aunt, well, Aurora wasn't just the owner," he began. "She took me in when I was 15. I was a mess. She gave me a job, a place to sleep, and eventually a reason to stay." Lena tilted her head, surprised, and blinked as a memory surfaced. Her teenage self sitting at that very table, watching a boy her age carrying crates in the back. "Think I remember you," she said slowly, almost like the words were foreign. "I came here one summer when I was 16. You looked taller back then," she added, a slight grin tugging at her lips. Theo chuckled, clearly appreciating the levity. "Didn't expect to still be here, honestly, but Aurora, she made this place feel like home, even when I had none. What I didn't expect was that she'd leave me half of it." Lena nodded, straightening in her seat. "Look, I don't see a problem with that. It was her wish and I respect it. We can go through the documents and decide on a price, split it, and each go our way." She pulled out a folder from her bag, but Theo didn't reach for it. He hesitated for a beat, then leaned forward slightly, tone calm but firm. "Actually, there's something you should know. In the will, there's a clause. Aurora wanted us to run the cafe together for 3 months before we even consider selling." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, what? You're telling me she made that a condition?" Theo nodded. "Yeah, she said if we were going to sell it, we had to understand what we were giving up first." Lena exhaled, trying to keep her composure. "Look, I get it, she was sentimental, but I'm not interested in running a business, especially not a cafe. I came to honor her wishes, but this part, this test run thing, I'd rather skip." Theo looked at her, gentle but unmoved. "I understand, but I promised her I'd do everything she asked, so I will. I didn't know about this clause," Lena said later that night in her hotel room, flipping through the digital version of the will for the 3rd time. But there it was, in small but unmistakable legal language. "No sale of the property shall occur before the co-inheritors engage in joint management of the establishment for a minimum period of 90 days. She groaned softly, placing the tablet down and rubbing her temples. It was unlike her to miss something like this, but maybe she'd skimmed the final section, assuming it would be the usual postscript about distribution. She wasn't used to people throwing unexpected emotions into contracts, but clearly, her aunt had always done things differently. The next morning, Lena returned to the cafe with her laptop under one arm and a fresh resolve under the other. She had worn a more neutral outfit, still clean-cut but less corporate, and greeted Theo with a civil nod. "I'd like to schedule a meeting," she said plainly, skipping the small talk. Theo, wiping down the front window with a cloth, glanced at her with mild curiosity. "That's a very formal way of saying good morning," he replied, but gestured toward the back office anyway. She followed him inside, closed the door, and sat down with a sigh. "Let's be adults about this. We have 90 days. Let's make them as efficient as possible." Theo leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed, waiting. Lena opened a presentation she had clearly worked on overnight, slides labeled efficiency goals, digital upgrade plan, and timeline to transition. "I've outlined a few key improvements we can implement, just small things at first. A digital PIGOS system, customer analytics, table QR menus for faster ordering. Nothing intrusive. These are low-risk upgrades that will streamline operations and increase revenue." She waited. Theo said nothing. He studied her face like he was reading subtitles in a language he didn't speak. "You want to turn this place into a vending machine with exposed brick," he said finally. "I want to make it sustainable." She countered, keeping her tone level. "There's a difference." Theo shook his head, not in anger but disappointment. "This place isn't broken. It doesn't need fixing. It needs people." Lena clicked her pen, a soft but pointed sound. "People can appreciate comfort and still expect efficiency. We don't have to serve coffee like it's a sacred ritual." He gave a short laugh. "That's exactly what it is, Lena. That's the entire point." They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the same spreadsheet, both seeing completely different things in the same data. Reluctantly, Theo agreed to test two of her ideas: QR code menus and a scheduling app for employees. "But the vinyl stays, and the chalkboard menu," he added firmly. Lena agreed, more out of strategy than conviction. She wanted to prove the numbers would speak for themselves once they were visible. They left the meeting with a temporary truce, but there was no warmth between them. Theo returned to his espresso machine, Lena to her keyboard and charts. In that moment, Café Aurora felt less like a sanctuary and more like a silent war zone disguised with vintage mugs. Customers sensed the shift almost immediately. There were now signs on the tables explaining how to scan for digital menus, and the new checkout tablet had replaced the rustic cash drawer. Some younger clients loved the change, quicker ordering, sleeker layout, but others looked confused, especially the older regulars. "Where's the little receipt book?" asked Mr. Carson, who had been coming in since 1983. Theo quickly pulled one out from under the counter, shooting Lena a look that said, "Not everyone wants to be updated." She didn't respond, but later replaced the tablet with a smaller, less obtrusive version. One afternoon, Lena stood in the kitchen during the lull between lunch and evening rush, adjusting the smart inventory system she'd just synced to the new supplier app. Theo walked in to grab a tray of pastries and stopped when he saw the interface. "You realize the supplier you just added doesn't carry our local beans, right?" Lena didn't look up. "They're cheaper and faster." Theo set the tray down with a little too much force. "And less personal. Rick, our bean guy, knows our roast profile. He calls me when a batch runs sweeter than usual." Lena blinked. "So you want to pay extra for poetic coffee?" He looked at her, calm but clear. "No. I want to pay for the relationship." The words hung in the air longer than necessary, and Lena suddenly felt aware of how clean and sterile her interface looked. Perfectly calculated, utterly detached. She closed the screen and walked out of the kitchen. That night she stayed late organizing financial reports. At some point she looked up and saw Theo closing the front blinds. Their eyes met briefly. No words. Just the shared fatigue of two people who cared deeply but differently. A few days later, Lena entered the cafe during peak hour and noticed that her playlist, meant to set a focused, modern atmosphere, had been swapped. In its place was a vinyl recording of soft indie folk, the kind of music that wrapped around you instead of pushing you forward. She scanned the room. Customers lingered more, smiling. Some even hummed. She hated that it worked. She hated it more that she liked how it felt. She said nothing, but the next day she added a small record player to her proposal, labeled Ambiance Compromise, Theo noticed. Of course he did. He made no comment but left her a sticky note that said, "See? You're not a robot." She crumpled it and threw it away, but not before smiling. That same afternoon, they had a mild disagreement over the pastries. Lena had scheduled a new supplier delivery without informing Theo, assuming it would save time. The new croissants were technically better shaped, but they tasted like cardboard. "Don't mess with the flour, Lena," Theo said, biting into one with a grimace. "Flour is sacred. You said coffee was sacred. Flour is sacred too." Their fights had taken on a rhythm now. Daily, soft-edged, annoying but never cruel. Lena kept pushing for systems, improvements, structure. Theo kept pushing back with stories, smells, and faces. And yet, a strange harmony began to bloom in the cracks between their arguments. She noticed how he always greeted the delivery drivers by name. He saw how she began to memorize the regulars' orders, not because of her system, but because she was paying attention. It was as if the cafe, in all its stubborn charm, was teaching them both a new language. Late one evening, when the cafe had emptied, and only the low hum of the espresso machine remained, Lena lingered at the register. Theo was restocking behind her when she finally said, "You know, this wasn't what I expected." He paused, not wanting to interrupt her honesty. "What did you expect?" he asked gently. She thought for a moment. To hate this place. To feel trapped. To want out. She turned to face him. "And now?" "Now I just want it to make sense." Theo gave a soft laugh. "Nothing about this place makes sense. That's why people love it." The next morning, Lena arrived determined to reclaim control over something, anything, after several small defeats in the past week. She went straight to the storage area, tablet in hand, ready to update the supplier list yet again. Theo intercepted, her standing in the narrow hallway with a cup of black coffee in each hand. "Before you replace another vendor," he said, handing her a cup, "you're going to learn how to make the house coffee properly. Real coffee, not the stuff you are." "Googled last night?" She narrowed her eyes. "I know how to make coffee." He raised a brow. "You know how to program it, not make it." Reluctantly, she followed him to the back where he'd set up a small training station. 2 grinders, a scale, a notebook full of scribbles, and several bags of beans. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but she didn't leave. He talked, her through every step with an annoying level of cheer. Water temperature, grind texture, bloom timing. And Lena took mental notes, though her arms remained rigid and her mouth tight. "Now pour it like you care about the outcome," he said, and she shot him a deadly look before pouring with exaggerated grace. "Happy now?" she asked. "Not until someone drinks it." As if on cue, Mrs. Denvers walked in, her floral scarf fluttering behind her like a cape of authority. "Is it true you're finally learning the sacred craft?" she asked Lena, accepting the mug with both hands. She took one sip, paused dramatically, and set the cup down. "Honey, you're not ready for marriage." Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Denvers didn't miss a beat. "Marriage, life, hosting, coffee is the foundation of the home, and yours tastes like broken promises. But don't worry, he can help you. Theo's always been ready." She smiled warmly. Lena smiled too, but internally considered deleting the loyalty program Mrs. Denvers loved so much. Later that day, Lena sat on the back steps of the cafe, staring at the city street and sipping water like it was scotch. Theo joined, her sitting with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere. "She's dramatic," he said, "but not entirely wrong." Lena sighed. "I'm not trying to marry the cafe. I'm just trying to get through the next 76 days without losing my mind." He looked over at her. "Then maybe stop fighting it so hard." She shook her head. "It's not the cafe I'm fighting. It's the part of me that thinks I'm failing just by being here." That confession hung between them for a moment longer than Lena liked. She got up quickly, brushing off her coat. "I'll finish updating." "The receipts," she said, her voice steady again. But Theo watched her go, sensing that underneath the spreadsheets and code, something was cracking. That night it rained again. Harder this time, with wind that pushed against the windows. The last customers left early, and Theo was cleaning tables when Lena reappeared from the office, sleeves rolled up, ready to help. "Don't say it," she said, grabbing a towel. "Say what?" he grinned. "That I'm not a robot." Too late. They worked in silence for a while, cleaning counters, flipping chairs, mopping the floor. The storm outside made the cafe feel smaller, like a secret cabin no one else knew about. At one point, they reached for the same glass and their hands touched briefly. Nothing dramatic, just warm, human contact in the middle of a quiet night. Lena didn't pull away. She simply looked at him, and for a second, the tension between them softened. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending to be the person everyone expects you to be?" she asked suddenly. Theo paused. "All the time." Lena leaned against the counter, staring at the empty espresso cups lined neatly on the shelf. "I've been the responsible one since I was a kid. Good grades, top of the class, scholarships, promotions. It's like the only way I know how to be loved is to win." Her voice didn't tremble, but it thinned. "And now I'm here in a place I didn't choose, with a person I didn't plan for, and for the first time I'm not sure what the win even is." Theo dried his hands and stood beside her, close but not too close. "Maybe there's no win, maybe there's just showing up." They sat in the corner booth afterward, still damp from the cleaning, sipping leftover tea. Theo stared at the raindrops racing each other down the window and said, "My dad left when I was 12. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a text message that said, 'It's better this way.' I spent the next 3 years trying to prove I wasn't the reason he left." Lena looked at him, not with pity, but recognition. "And Aurora?" she asked. He nodded. "She saw me breaking and told me I was worth putting back together. She was the first adult who didn't ask me to earn my place." They didn't speak for a while after that. The cafe made its own kind of music, drips, hums, distant thunder. Lena eventually stood, stretched, and walked to the door. "See? You tomorrow?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Unless you replace me with a robot," Theo said with a half-smile. "No promises," she replied, then added more quietly, "But maybe not yet." She left into the rain, her coat too thin, her thoughts too full. Theo watched her go, not sure when it had started to matter. The next day, something shifted in their rhythm. Theo brought in a rare bean from a small supplier, claiming it had notes of plum and cinnamon. Lena pretended not to care but asked for a sample mid-morning. She took a sip, winced, and said, "Tastes like regret and raisins." He laughed, harder than she expected, and it startled them both. That afternoon, she surprised him by offering to draft a survey for customers, one that asked not just what they liked, but how they felt. "Emotion metrics," she explained. "Apparently, they exist. Apparently, you have them too." he replied. The cafe was almost at capacity when it happened. A man in a tailored coat and stylish glasses stepped inside, followed by a small crew and an expensive-looking camera. Lena noticed first, recognizing him from the splash of food blogs and viral reviews. Marco Sterling, a self-declared coffee critic with millions of followers and a reputation for savage honesty. Theo froze for a second, then adjusted his apron and walked over. "We didn't know you were coming," he said politely. "Didn't want you to," Marco replied with a grin, then took a seat near the window and opened his laptop. "Don't worry, I'm discreet. Sometimes." They served him without ceremony. Theo made the espresso himself. Lena adjusted the lighting remotely to set the right tone, and they both watched from a distance as Marco sipped, frowned, and typed. An hour later, he left without a word. The review dropped that night. "Charming space, nostalgic decor, but the soul is fighting with a machine. Half the staff wants you to breathe. The other half wants you to scan a QR code and vanish. Café. Aurora can't decide what it is." The post exploded. Comments flooded in. The cafe was suddenly the symbol of creative confusion, and not in a flattering way. Theo read the review in silence, jaw tight, then tossed his phone onto the counter. Lena didn't say anything at first. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, frozen between denial and panic. "It's not entirely wrong," she said finally, trying to sound logical. Theo turned toward her, voice sharp. "Of course you'd think that. You've been trying to turn this place into a tech hub since day one." She stood. "Don't put this on me. We agreed on changes, together. You just didn't like them. When they actually worked. They didn't work, they split the place in half. Maybe it was already split." The fight escalated fast, voices rising, cutting through the quiet late-night hum of the cafe. "You think you're the only one who cares?" Lena snapped. "I gave up a promotion in London to come here. I've worked every night to make this place not fall apart." Theo stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I never asked you to. You're here because of a will. I'm here because this place is my life." That hit harder than she expected. She turned away, blinking too quickly. "Well, congratulations, you're doing great." She walked out into the street before the rain could finish the sentence. They didn't speak for 2 days. The cafe ran in awkward silence, orders taken quietly, notes passed through staff, playlists alternating between cheerful denial and moody jazz. Lena spent most of her time in the office, working on PR ideas to recover from the bad press. Theo focused on the floor, handling customers, rebuilding their trust cup by cup. On the 3rd day, Lena sent out a newsletter from Café Aurora's official email. "We heard you. We're listening. Let's talk about what Café Aurora means, too." You read the message was simple, heartfelt, and signed by both their names. She didn't ask Theo first. He saw it that evening while closing the till. He didn't say anything, just looked at her across the cafe with something softer in his expression. The next morning, she walked in and found a sticky note on her laptop. "Thank you for fighting. Back even when I didn't." She didn't smile, but her chest tightened. That day, they worked together again. Not perfectly, but side by side. Customers started returning. New ones came out of curiosity. Slowly, Café Aurora began to feel like something whole again. Something they were both holding together instead of pulling apart. It was a Friday afternoon when Theo's phone buzzed. Lena was mid-meeting with a potential new supplier when he interrupted, clearly distracted. "Hey, can you close up tonight?" he asked. I have someone coming by." She nodded, curious, but said nothing. As sunset spilled gold across the tables, Lena stayed behind, counting tips, when the front door opened. A woman walked Tall, radiant, casually elegant like a magazine ad, had stepped into the room. "Theo," she called, spotting him from the back. He walked over and they hugged. Not friendly, intimate. Lena remained behind the counter, silent, her hands still inside the cash drawer. They sat at a corner table, talking quietly, the woman touching Theo's arm when she laughed, brushing her fingers along his wrist like it belonged to her. It was ridiculous, Lena thought. She didn't care, of course she didn't. It was just unexpected. She had never even considered the idea of Theo having a girlfriend. Not because he wasn't attractive, he was infuriatingly so, but because he had felt available, present, with her. And now, watching him lean in close, Lena felt something she wasn't ready to name. That night she cleaned the cafe slowly, more thoroughly than necessary. Every chair wiped twice, every napkin refolded. The lights dimmed around her like the place itself was trying to let her sit with what she felt. Theo didn't return to say goodnight. She didn't expect him to. But when she locked the door and turned the sign to closed, the reflection in the glass didn't look like someone indifferent. It looked like someone unsure. Someone who was losing control in a place she hadn't meant to care about. The next day she didn't mention the woman, but she noticed everything. Theo wore a different shirt, one Lena hadn't seen before. His hair was still a little tousled, like he hadn't fully shaken the night. He made coffee quieter than usual. Lena didn't speak more than necessary, and yet she found herself glancing at him too often, watching the way he poured, the way he smiled at an elderly couple, the way he fixed the napkin holder without being asked. She hated how good he was at small things, hated how it made her feel, but she couldn't stop noticing. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. He noticed, too, that she was quieter, that she didn't argue when he suggested playing records, that she stayed an extra 20 minutes after close without explaining why. She even offered to write a short thank you letter for the community board, in her clean digital style, but still, it meant something. These were not gestures of obligation. They were choices, small, unspoken, deliberate. And it scared her. Because if it was a choice, this cafe, this place, this man, then what would happen when her time here ran out? The next 2 weeks passed like a long exhale. The cafe, once filled with unspoken tension and conflicting visions, found its rhythm. Lena streamlined the operations in ways that even Theo had to admit made life easier, while Theo curated small rituals, like handwritten notes on napkins and themed music days, that brought warmth into the structure Lena had built. They weren't just co-managing anymore. They were complementing each other, unintentionally syncing in small moments, like two people learning the same language from opposite ends of the room. The regulars noticed. So did the staff. But no one said it out loud. One Tuesday morning, Theo and Lena stood side by side behind the espresso machine, arguing playfully about the foam texture on a cappuccino. He leaned slightly too close to demonstrate, and she gave him a light shove with her elbow, laughing under her breath. It wasn't flirtatious, not exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. They were mid-laugh when the door chimed, and Lena looked up to see the tall, elegant figure of Theo's girlfriend stepping inside. The woman's smile faltered slightly when she saw them, and Lena's stomach twisted in a way she didn't like to name. Theo greeted her with polite warmth, walking over, with a careful distance in his voice. Lena didn't watch, but she heard the cadence of their conversation, too formal to be familiar, too strained to be romantic. When they left together minutes later, Lena found herself scrubbing the countertop longer than necessary. The cloth squeaked under her grip, and when Theo returned a few minutes later, She had already buried herself in receipts. Neither of them mentioned the encounter, but the air between them felt heavier, like the silence had absorbed the weight of something neither dared to say. Fridays used to be Theo's early night out. He always left after the last rush, handing off the closing shift with a grateful smile. But 2 Fridays in a row, Lena noticed he stayed. When she finally asked why, he just shrugged and said, "No plans anymore." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought you had someone." He wiped a mug clean and set it down. "Turns out she didn't like that I wasn't someone else. She wanted more control, more attention, more certainty. And I've never been good with certainty." He didn't look sad, just lighter. And Lena didn't know what to say to that. The absence of the girlfriend did not go unnoticed, but Lena didn't dare ask more. Instead, she found herself noticing things that had always been there. The way Theo's laughter always started low, before rising, how he hummed when focused, how he left post-it notes for the staff with little doodles. One morning she caught herself smiling just because he was nearby. It irritated her. Not because it was bad, but because it was easy, and Lena had never allowed herself to want things that came easy. They scared her more than failure. One rainy Wednesday, Theo came to her with an idea, something the old Aurora Café used to do years ago, jazz and candlelight night. We'd dim the lights, light some candles, invite a local trio, and let the music do the talking, he explained. Eyes lit up like a boy proposing a science experiment. Lena blinked, surprised. "You want my approval on something creative?" He laughed. "I want your help." She stared at the mock-up he'd made, a flyer sketched in pencil on a napkin. It was charming and crooked. She sighed, grabbed her tablet and said, "Let me make it symmetrical." They planned the event over the next several days like co-directors staging a play. Lena handled the marketing, social media posts, online sign-ups, posters in neighboring cafes, while Theo coordinated with the musicians and set up the atmosphere. They tested candles, argued over table layout, and even sampled desserts from a local bakery at 10 p.m. in the back kitchen, both too tired to pretend they weren't enjoying themselves. At one point, Lena said, "You know this could all fall apart, right?" And Theo replied, "That's what makes it worth doing." She didn't argue with that. The night arrived with more guests than expected. Every table was full, the air thick with espresso and soft saxophone. The lights were dim, the candles flickered, and the music filled the corners like memories that never left. Lena wore a dark green dress she hadn't worn in years, not since her last formal presentation in New York. Theo wore a vest over his usual shirt. No tie, but he looked intentional. They worked like a team, moving through the space with ease, checking in on guests, laughing behind the counter. Someone even asked if they were married. Theo grinned. Lena almost choked on her drink. Between sets, Lena stepped outside to breathe. The air was cool, and for the first time she wasn't thinking about spreadsheets or deadlines. She was just there. Present. Theo joined her a moment later, handing her a small chocolate from the dessert tray. "One for the director," he said. She took it without a word, their hands brushing briefly. "You clean up well," she said. "So do you. But don't let it go to your head." They smiled quietly, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like something waiting to be broken. It felt like a space to rest in. Back inside, the final song played, a slow, aching melody that made the room sway like a memory. Theo moved behind her and whispered, "We should do this again." She didn't turn. "Yeah, we should." When the last guest left and the last candle had burned low, they sat together in the dark, drinking the leftover wine and listening to the silence breathe. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting their shadows on the wooden floor like a pair of people trying not to drift too far. Lena leaned back and whispered, "It's almost too easy." Theo replied, "Then maybe don't fight." They stayed like that for a while, shadows flickering across their faces as the empty cafe exhaled the night. Lena set her glass down, eyes soft from the wine and the weight of everything unsaid. "How did we even end up here?" she murmured, half to herself. Theo leaned back, resting one arm on the booth behind her. "I guess it started with a will and bad coffee, and that spreadsheet you wouldn't let me touch." She laughed, quiet and full, the kind of laugh that didn't try to prove anything. "And you with your sacred flower." He turned slightly toward her, close but not imposing, like someone leaning into a secret. "You know, for someone who wanted to sell everything and disappear, you've become kind of essential here." She looked up, eyes flickering to his. "I could say the same about you." The silence returned, but this time it was electric, trembling between them like the edge of something about to change shape. She looked at his mouth, then back at his eyes. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. "Probably," he replied. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't dramatic. It was soft and certain, like two people leaning into something they had already chosen, long before they admitted it out loud. Her hand touched his face without thinking, and his fingers brushed her waist like they weren't sure they were allowed to stay. When they finally parted, they both stayed still, eyes locked, like the air between them was still catching up to what had just happened. Lena swallowed, voice barely audible. "Well, that happened." Theo nodded, a slow grin forming. "Yeah, that happened." The next morning everything felt louder. The espresso machine hissed more aggressively. The bell above the door rang like a fire alarm, and every movement felt either too casual or too intentional. Lena arrived earlier than usual, wearing a sweater she normally kept for Sundays, and tried not to look too closely at Theo when he walked in with 2 coffees instead of 1. "Thought you might need extra caffeine," he said. "You know, after a long night." She took the cup without looking at him. "Thanks." Their fingers brushed. She blinked too long. The hours passed with subtle glances and half smiles that tried not to mean anything but failed miserably. He stood a little closer when they worked side by side, and she didn't pull away when his arm brushed hers. She laughed more. He noticed. When she asked for help restocking the syrups, he followed her into the back and reached over her shoulder to grab a bottle. For a moment they stood there, almost touching, neither moving. But nothing happened. Not again. It was like the kiss had opened a door they weren't sure how to walk through yet. That evening, just as they were locking up, Theo's phone buzzed twice in quick succession. He checked the screen, and his smile faded into something Lena hadn't seen before. Unease. "Everything okay?" she asked. He hesitated. "It's my dad. Haven't heard from him in years. He's in Arizona. Says he needs help." Lena frowned. "Are you going?" Theo nodded slowly. "I think I have to." He didn't say much, but it didn't sound good. She didn't ask questions, she just nodded. "Of course, go. I've got this." The next morning Theo left before the cafe opened. Lena arrived alone, made the coffee exactly how he taught her, and turned the sign to open. The cafe felt quieter without him, not empty, but incomplete. She found herself doing everything the way he would, putting on the vinyl instead of her playlist, writing little notes to the regulars, using his mug instead of hers. The customers noticed. "Where's Theo?" Mrs. Denvers asked. "Out of town," Lena replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a few days." By the second day, she knew the routine better than she realized. She managed the deliveries, coordinated with the baker, and even fixed the espresso machine when it sputtered, just like Theo had shown her during one of their many late-night closings. She didn't change a thing. No spreadsheets, no upgrades, no experiments she didn't want to. For the first time, Lena wasn't trying to improve something. She was trying to protect it. That realization hit her mid-shift while she was restocking. Coffee beans. She froze for a moment, then kept going. By the third day, she missed him. Not just his presence, but the way the space shifted when he was around. The jokes, the tension, the balance. She stayed a little later than usual, cleaning the counter with a care that surprised even her. When she locked up, she glanced at the chair where he usually sat during closing and whispered, "You better come back." The words felt stupid the moment they left her mouth. But they were true. That night she dreamt of the cafe, filled with candles and music, but no one behind the counter but her. The next morning, the bell above the door rang early, before she'd even finished prepping the pastries. She looked up, still groggy, and saw him. Theo, in the same travel-wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, but smiling like he had just come home. "You opened without me," he said, stepping inside. "I had no choice," she replied, not smiling, but her voice betrayed her. "How was Arizona?" "Heavy," he said, "but I'm glad I went." They stood there for a second, unsure whether to hug or nod. In the end, they just looked, and that was enough. That evening, as the cafe closed under the golden haze of late sunlight, Lena wiped down the last table and glanced at Theo by the register. "So, are you going to tell me about Arizona? Or just keep pretending it was a beach trip?" she asked. Theo smiled faintly, stacking a receipt roll. "Dinner, tonight, my place. I'll cook something you won't mock, and you can tell me how the cafe survived without me." She raised an eyebrow. "You're assuming I missed you." "No," he said, grabbing the keys. "I'm hoping you did." Theo's apartment sat just behind the cafe, a modest space filled with quiet charm. Worn books, mismatched mugs, and a window that overlooked the alley where deliveries came in. The kitchen smelled like garlic and thyme as Lena sat on a bar stool, watching him move with practiced ease. "I didn't know you could cook," she said. "There's a lot you don't know," he replied, not looking at her. The tension wasn't heavy. It was curious, like a page halfway turned. When they sat down, the food was simple: pasta, toasted bread, a bottle of red wine. It was enough. "So," Lena said, swirling the wine in her glass, "tell me about your dad." Theo leaned back slightly, the light above them casting soft shadows on his jawline. He was kind of like a ghost. There, but not really. Always chasing some new idea, some new version of himself. Then one day he just left. No real explanation. Said he needed to reset his life. Lena's eyes didn't blink. "And you?" He shrugged. "I stopped waiting for someone to come back. That's how I ended up with Aurora. She was the first person who didn't leave when I needed her most." She listened in silence, absorbing each word like steam into linen. He talked about the quiet years, the anger he buried under responsibility, the way coffee saved him because it demanded patience and presence. "I guess," he said, looking at her across the candle-lit table, "I never learned how to expect people to stay, so I learned how to make them feel at home, even if they didn't." Lena didn't speak for a long moment. Then she reached out, touched his hand gently and whispered, "You do that really well." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "So do you, but only when you forget to be scared." They moved to the couch after dinner, a quiet playlist humming in the background. The light dimmed to an amber glow. Lena curled her legs beneath her, her shoulder brushing against his. Their hands found each other on the cushion between them. Slowly, shyly, like they'd forgotten how to be strangers. His thumb traced hers. She turned her face toward him, lips parted just slightly, and he leaned in. He didn't kiss her yet. He just lifted her chin with 2 fingers, gently, like asking a question. She didn't answer. She just closed the space. This kiss wasn't soft like the first. It was deeper, steadier, the kind that follows weeks of avoidance and silent wanting. Her hands moved to his shoulders, his slid to her waist. And when they pulled apart, it wasn't for breath. It was to look, really look, at each other. And then the space vanished. Clothes slipped away like coffee filters peeling back, layer by layer, until all that remained was heat, steam, and the rhythm of 2 people boiling over. It was messy, unscripted, real. And when he whispered her name against her skin, Lena felt her entire logic collapse into something beautifully reckless. Later, as they lay tangled in soft sheets that smelled like roasted cinnamon and rain, Lena stared at the ceiling. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to feel this, but Theo's arm was wrapped around her like an anchor, and her own fingers traced lazy shapes across his chest. She had promised herself no roots, no ties, no detours. But now her heart was betraying her, sigh by sigh, beneath the weight of his presence. And she was scared, not of him, but of how much it would hurt to walk away. The next few days blurred into a quiet routine, intimate, careful, almost sacred. They didn't talk about what they were. They didn't have to. It was in the way he brewed her coffee without asking, in the way she kissed him behind the counter when no one was looking, in the silence between their footsteps that didn't need filling anymore. The cafe thrived. Customers lingered longer. Reviews returned, this time with praise. People said Café Aurora had found its soul, but Lena knew it wasn't the cafe that changed. It was her. And the days were moving too fast. It hit her on a Tuesday while writing the schedule for the next 2 weeks. She paused, stared at the calendar, and counted backward. 7 days. That was all that remained of the 90. Suddenly the air felt thinner. She walked outside, sat on the back steps, and let the afternoon sun settle on her skin like a question. She couldn't answer. She had built a rhythm here. She had learned the names of the flowers in the window boxes. She had kissed Theo like he was gravity. But the countdown never stopped ticking, and London was still waiting. That night, she told him. Over quiet coffee in the apartment, post-close, she said, "I need to go to London for a few days." Theo didn't flinch. He nodded. "To end things?" She nodded. "To decide if I even want to restart them." He studied her for a moment, then simply said, "Okay." She expected resistance. What she got was trust, and that made it harder. She packed lightly, left a note on the counter that said, "Back in a few. Don't burn the croissants." And then, she boarded a plane, wondering when everything had become so heavy. London greeted Lena with rain and rush, familiar, metallic, efficient. Her firm's headquarters hadn't changed. Glass, steel, and deadlines polished to a mirror shine. In her meeting, the partners asked the usual questions, then leaned in with curiosity about her time in New York. "You ran a cafe?" one asked. Amused. "Briefly," she replied. "And?" Lena looked out the window before answering. "It was the most disorganized, emotional, irrational experience I've ever had." She paused. "And the most human." They laughed, but there was interest in their eyes. One executive passed her a folder. "We're expanding a team in New York. Creative strategy meets experience design. You'd lead it." Lena flipped through the pages, intrigued despite herself. The numbers were good. The location better. Her name would be at the top. She walked back to her flat later that evening with a strange lightness, like she had just been handed back her old life on a silver tray. She poured a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and stared at the offer. It felt right, mostly. But when she closed her eyes, all she saw was Theo laughing behind the espresso machine, or Mrs. Denvers talking to a flower pot, or the quiet clink of dishes being washed at midnight. The cafe had embedded itself somewhere unexpected, beneath her ribs, behind her logic. He'd understand, she whispered. He lives for that place. She imagined telling Theo she'd be in New York, leading projects, coming back sometimes, maybe. It made sense, but it didn't sit right. She slept poorly, dreaming of vinyl songs and candlelight. The next morning, she landed in the cafe's doorway before sunrise, her bag still in the trunk of a cab. Theo was sweeping the front, hoodie slightly wrinkled, hair damp from mist. "You're early," he said. "Didn't want to miss the pastries," she replied, stepping inside. The space smelled like nutmeg and safety. He handed her coffee without asking. They didn't talk about business, not yet. She told him about the firm. "The new team, the proposal, sounds like a big deal," he said. "It is." "Is it good for you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think so." That night, Theo suggested they celebrate. Not at the cafe, not at home, but somewhere removed from routine. They went to a small Italian restaurant tucked in a narrow street, where candles flickered in old wine bottles, and the pasta came in steaming ceramic bowls. She laughed more than she expected. He held her hand under the table for the first time in public, and it didn't feel strange. Later, they wandered into a quiet bar, shared a cocktail neither could pronounce, and danced to a song no one else was dancing to. It felt like floating above consequence. Walking back, Lena didn't let go of his hand. The night was cool, quiet, the kind that asked for slowness. At the corner by the cafe, she stopped, looked at him and said, "Do you want to come up?" He searched her face as if asking if she was sure. She nodded. Inside her apartment, everything felt sharper. Colors, scents, the way his eyes looked when he was just him. No apron, no register, just Theo. He kissed her as she closed the door, slow and intentional, as if they were arriving somewhere they'd both been trying to find. Their laughter echoed in the hallway as they kicked off shoes, unbuttoned coats, and reached for each other with more confidence than before. The way he lifted her onto the kitchen counter mid-kiss made her gasp. The way she pulled his sweater over his head in one motion made him smile into her shoulder. Clothes fell like petals across the floor, slow, natural, one piece at a time. In the dim light, their skin met like puzzle pieces worn from trying to fit elsewhere. He pressed her gently against the cool marble, whispering something about her always rushing the pour. She laughed, breathless. "Shut up and brew me right." He did, with hands that knew where to hold and where to hesitate, with lips that alternated between reverence and craving. Their rhythm built slowly, syncopated like jazz, with crescendos and silences and that impossible balance between surrender and certainty. When it ended, they stayed wrapped around each other on the couch, tangled and warm, her head resting on his chest. "I didn't want this," she said, barely audible. "No," he replied, fingers in her hair, "but you chose it anyway." She fell asleep like that against him, heart exposed, limbs soft, for once without armor. The following days were both more natural and more dangerous. Every touch carried weight. Every silence suggested the clock was ticking. Lena moved through the cafe with her usual precision, but now she caught herself waiting for him to brush. Against her in the hallway, for his hand to find the small of her back without warning. He'd look at her during lulls in the day like he was memorizing her, and that scared her more than any business meeting ever had. In the final days leading up to the decision, Theo began to notice the way Lena moved through the cafe. She wasn't distracted or distant, not exactly, but there was a pause in her rhythm, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She smiled a little slower, folded napkins twice, stared at the back door like something was waiting there. At night, they still curled into each other like puzzle pieces, but her breathing was deeper, heavier, like she was trying to memorize what it meant to stay. And Theo, though he didn't say it, felt it too. They worked like clockwork during the day, co-managing the cafe with that strange blend of logic and chaos only they could pull off. She handled inventory and schedules, he handled people and playlists. But in the quiet moments between rushes, their hands found each other behind the counter, or their eyes locked mid-laugh, as if to say, "Remember this." And each night, they returned to her apartment or his, made something warm, talked about nothing and everything. They were holding their own little world together, pretending it wasn't balancing on a deadline. One afternoon, a potential buyer arrived. He was polite, clean-cut, with a firm handshake and a voice full of words like scalability, brand conversion, and customer automation. Lena offered him coffee while Theo leaned back, arms crossed. "I imagine some redesign," the man said. "Aesthetics closer to modern cafes. Maybe some kiosks, streamline the vibe." Lena smiled, tight-lipped. Theo didn't. "Right," she replied. "Nothing says soul like touchscreen espresso." Theo coughed to cover his laugh, and she nudged him under the table. It was subtle, but it was theirs. That night, as they cleaned up in silence, Lena poured 2 glasses of wine and passed one to Theo without looking at him. "I don't think I can sell it," she said finally. He didn't respond right away, just waited. She looked down. "I came here to end a chapter, but something about this place, about you, kept asking me to stay in the middle of it. These months grounded me, made me put my hands on real things. I never knew I needed that." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she didn't try to fix it. Theo stepped closer but didn't interrupt. She went on. "I know I can't be here every day. This new job, it's big. But the cafe is yours. It always was. You know every face, every story. Maybe I just want to still be a part of it. Somehow." She looked up. "Would you stay? Keep running it, even if I'm not always next to you?" Theo let the silence sit between them a little longer. Then he exhaled. "I'd stay, but not for the cafe." He touched her hand. "Because I changed, too. Because you showed me how." He walked with her to the back door that night, their steps slow like the end of a film. "It won't be the same," he said. "Not without you physically here." Lena nodded. "But it won't be the same. Without you either. So I guess I'll just have to come back." He smiled. "Good. Because this place isn't Cafe Aurora without you arguing over pastry invoices and quoting data on syrup usage." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "You kept the chalkboard menu. Because you never deleted the Spotify jazz list I made. And that was enough." The next morning, Lena woke alone. The light filtered in through the apartment window like soft gold. She stretched slowly, expecting to find Theo beside her, but the other side of the bed was empty. For a second, her heart sank, until she noticed a small envelope on her kitchen counter. It was old, slightly yellowed and sealed. Beside it, on a folded napkin, Theo had scribbled in his familiar print, "Your grandmother asked me to give you this when the time came." Her breath caught. She sat down and opened it with shaking hands. The letter inside was written in graceful script, Aurora's hand, steady and full of warmth. "My dear Lena," it began. "If you're reading this, then the cafe has done its job. Brought you back, not just to me or to Theo, but to yourself. You were always strong, always brilliant, but I worried you'd lose your softness chasing a future that demanded hardness. The cafe isn't perfect. It's messy, loud, human, but it teaches you to love what stays, to listen, to taste before judging. If you leave again, let it be with both feet on the ground." Tears spilled silently as Lena read, "Whatever you choose, stay or go, just promise me you'll keep one thing real in your life. Something you don't optimize, fix, or measure. Just feel. That's your inheritance, Lena. Not the bricks. Not the keys, but the permission to feel." The letter ended with a simple line. "Love without caution. You've earned it." When she folded it and held it to her chest, it felt like a new compass had been placed in her hands. Not to tell her where to go, but to remind her what to follow. Lena read the letter again that morning, sitting by the window with her knees tucked to her chest and the sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. She traced the words with her fingers, mouthing parts of the lines like a quiet chant. Love without caution. Something about it stayed in her chest like warmth that wouldn't fade. She didn't cry this time, she just let it sink in, let it belong to her. Then she folded it with care and slipped it into her bag, not because she needed it with her, but because it deserved to be close. When she arrived at the cafe, Theo was on the floor with a wrench, fixing a stubborn leg on one of the old tables. "You look like you slept with your soul in a new position," he said, not looking up. "You have no idea," Lena replied, crouching down beside him. "I'm not selling." He glanced at her, surprised but not shocked. "I figured. You've been clinging to that receipt drawer like it's a family heirloom." She grinned. "It kind of is now." They sat on the floor for a while, surrounded by mismatched chairs and the scent of roasted beans. They didn't talk about titles or ownership. Instead, Lena said, "I'll be in London most of the time. I can do some of the business side remotely. Finance, branding. I'll still write the newsletters." Theo nodded. "You'll keep sending voice notes that I forget to answer, and I'll pretend to hate your supplier spreadsheets even though I use them." She laughed. "Exactly." Then she added more softly, "But I'll come back, often." He looked at her with something gentle in his eyes. "You better. The pastries behave better when you're around." The final day of the 90 arrived, with little fanfare. They didn't advertise anything grand. Instead, they kept it quiet, no signs, no discounts, no speeches. But the regulars came. Some brought flowers, others just stayed longer. The cafe glowed with that lived-in magic only time and care could build. Theo brewed every coffee himself that day. Lena wore the green dress again, the one from jazz night, and tied her hair up like she used to for board meetings. When Theo saw her, he smiled in that quiet way that didn't ask for permission to feel something. That night, after the last table was wiped and the lights were dimmed, they stayed behind. No customers, no playlists. Just the soft buzz of the old refrigerator and the pulse of their own breath in the empty space. Lena leaned on the counter, arms crossed, eyes tired but full. Theo walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. 90 days, he whispered, and we didn't kill each other. She tilted her head back against him. Not even once. That's what I call progress. They kissed slowly, not like celebration, but like confirmation, like something already known. Then he pulled her by the hand to the back room, where string lights still hung from a birthday party weeks ago. There, on an old couch that had no business being romantic, they curled into each other. No rush, no drama, just mouths brushing skin, hands tracing lines they already knew by heart. "Tell me something you haven't said yet," she whispered between kisses. "I still hate QR codes," he murmured into her neck. She laughed, breath hitching. "Then don't look in the sugar cabinet." Their clothes scattered across the floor slowly, like they were unwrapping a memory. Everything between them had softened. There was no hunger now, only hunger's echo, stretched into tenderness. He kissed her like someone reading poetry aloud. She touched him like someone sealing a letter. Later, as they lay there, tangled together beneath a blanket that smelled like vanilla and dust, she ran her fingers down the center of his chest and said, "I'm afraid this is the part where it ends." He didn't open his eyes. "Or the part where it just begins differently." They slept there that night, in the quiet hum of the cafe that had once been a battlefield, and was now just theirs. The next morning, Lena made the first coffee. She did it Theo's way, slow, careful, without automation. He watched from the doorway, arms crossed, smile crooked. "Look at you, artisan queen." She rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it. I fly out in 2 days." He stepped forward, brushing her cheek. "That's okay, you left enough of yourself here to run the place anyway." And for once, she didn't argue. The week in London was fast-paced and full of closure. Lena met with legal, closed out her apartment, and turned in her last internal reports. Everyone congratulated her. On the promotion, on New York, on what they called her perfect arc. But at night, when the city quieted and she was alone in hotel rooms with clean white sheets, she thought about the cafe, about the uneven chairs, about Theo's voice at sunrise. Her past had been polished, but her present smelled like cinnamon and was a little loud in the mornings. When her plane touched down at JFK, she didn't even think of going to her new apartment. The cab dropped her off right in front of the cafe, still closed. The light, inside faint like a heartbeat before waking. She didn't knock, just stood there for a moment, hand on the door, smiling softly. Then it opened. Theo, still in pajama pants, holding a coffee cup and looking like he knew exactly when she'd arrive. "You're home," he said, voice still raspy from sleep. "And you," she said, stepping inside, "still drink coffee before brushing your teeth." He had made her favorite, oat milk, half shot, extra cinnamon, and left it warming beside. A napkin with a doodle of the two of them on the jazz night. She sat in her usual booth while he finished opening. Nothing had changed. Not really. But everything felt clearer. This wasn't just a cafe. It was her pause button, her anchor. And as the sun spilled through the front windows, warming her face, Lena knew that coming back wasn't just comfort. It was choice. She belonged in both worlds now. The difference was this one made her feel real. The next few days were a whirlwind of onboarding, office tours, and department meetings. Her new role came with a corner desk, a team of 6, and more freedom than she'd ever had in her career. But no matter how productive or polished the days were, they always ended the same, with Lena slipping away to the cafe before closing. Sometimes she helped count tips. Sometimes she just leaned against the counter, sipping tea while Theo played vinyls. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Just being there reset her pulse. One evening she walked into the cafe after a long board presentation to find something different. The lights were low. A single table was set near the front with candles, fresh tulips in a mug, and a handwritten menu titled One Night Chef's Special by Theo. He wore a blazer over his print and grinned when she gasped. "Thought the promotion deserved something low-key," she laughed. "This is low-key." He pulled out her chair. "We're still on a budget. The wine is questionably French." It was one of her favorite nights in years. They spent that night walking through a quiet part of Brooklyn, hand in hand, eating ice cream and sharing bites of each other's cones. She talked about her new assistant. He talked about Mrs. Denver's starting a book club in the cafe. They didn't mention time or distance or futures. They just lived. When they stopped at the corner where she used to turn toward her old apartment, she paused. "Feels weird not living here anymore," she said. "You kind of do," Theo said, brushing her knuckle. "You never really left." Mornings started earlier now. Lena would wake at 6:30, dress in her perfectly pressed slacks, and take this train to Midtown. She handled reports, gave feedback, and sat in sleek glass conference rooms with smart people saying smart things. But sometimes at 11:17 a.m. sharp, she'd glance at the time and think, Theo's probably adjusting the grind setting again. Or did they reorder the vanilla syrup? She'd catch herself smiling at her laptop and shake her head. The cafe was never far. It was a rhythm inside her now. On Wednesday, she had a rough pitch session with a client who didn't know what they wanted until they didn't want it from her. At 5:45, she stepped off the elevator, and instead of going home, she hopped on a downtown train. By 6:22, she was back at the cafe. Theo was just putting away cups. He looked up. "Bad day?" She nodded, dropped her bag, walked behind the counter, and hugged him. "No words," she whispered. "Not a single one." He poured her tea and handed her a chocolate chip cookie. "I got you." They found a rhythm, imperfect, evolving, but real. Lena would leave the cafe at 7:15 most mornings, coffee in hand, hair pulled back, heels echoing across the sidewalk. Theo stayed behind, adjusting the playlist, coaching new staff, scribbling notes in the margins of the chalkboard. They didn't text constantly, didn't need to. A photo here, a voicemail there, a napkin left in her bag with the words, "I miss you" in green, written in Theo's sharp handwriting. Some nights she stayed over. Others she slept alone, reading proposals with jazz playing softly in the background, knowing Theo was doing the same 3 blocks away. They didn't live together. Not officially. But pieces of her were always in the cafe. Her favorite mug, her playlist titled For Quiet Tuesdays. A photo of them near the register holding the worst latte ever made. Customers asked about her. Theo always smiled and said, "She's around." And she was. Just not always where people could see. Her job was demanding but no longer devouring. She led meetings, mentored interns, pitched bold ideas. And sometimes, when people asked her where she found inspiration, she said, "From a place that smells like burnt toast and second chances." Her boss once commented, "You're softer now. Still sharp, but softer." And Lena didn't flinch, because she knew softness wasn't weakness. It was precision without panic, patience without performance. It was the version of herself that had grown quietly behind a counter she never meant to stand behind. Theo, on the other hand, was thriving in his chaos. The cafe grew slowly, no chains, no expansion, but its heartbeat louder than ever. He introduced poetry nights, let customers sign their names under the tables. One kid brought his sketchbook every Thursday just to draw the cups. Theo didn't modernize much, but he added a new espresso machine Lena helped him choose online. He still hated QR codes, but he admitted out loud once that mobile orders weren't the worst idea after all. It was their compromise. Their fingerprints, side by side. They didn't talk about forever. Not really. They talked about Tuesday, about whether the new delivery guy would ever stop dropping croissants, about whether Lena could make the event Thursday or would be stuck in another late client call. But when they sat on the floor of Theo's apartment, eating noodles straight from the carton, Lena once said, "I don't know what this is supposed to be, but it's the first thing I haven't wanted to label and walk away from." And Theo replied, You don't have to name something you're willing to return to. One Saturday afternoon, she brought her laptop to the cafe and worked from her usual corner. Theo kept slipping her pastries she didn't ask for, and she kept pretending to be annoyed. A customer leaned in and asked if she worked there. Not really, Lena smiled, but I kind of live here. When the woman left, Theo sat across from her and whispered, You just said the truth out loud. Lena looked at him for a beat. Too long. Yeah, she said, I did. He kissed her across the table, flower still on his sleeve. It wasn't perfect. Some weeks were harder than others. Some nights she fell asleep on spreadsheets. Some days he forgot to reply to her messages until after midnight. But they never lost the thread, even when it frayed, even when it went quiet. The cafe became a symbol for both of them, not of what they gave up, but of what they chose to keep. And that, more than anything, was what love became, not a promise of always, but a rhythm of returning. The anniversary of the 90 days came and went quietly. Lena left a note in the tip jar that said, Thanks for teaching me how to stay. Theo laminated it, hung it on the office wall. That night after the last customer left, they sat on the floor of the cafe eating cake with their fingers. This place should have failed, she said, licking chocolate off her thumb. So should we, he replied, kissing her wrist. But look at us. Somehow, we didn't. The cake was dry, the wine cheap, the moment perfect.